London, December 1942. A single bullet, wrapped in what military brass dismissed as rubbish from a broken window, just shattered the German Wehrmacht's most protected position in North Africa. The marksman who fired it shouldn't have been holding a rifle at all. He was the optician's apprentice from Manchester who'd been rejected by the army twice for poor eyesight. Yet his ridiculous modification would turn sniping doctrine on its head, reduce enemy officer casualties by 500%, and force the Reich to completely redesign their field command structure within 8 months. What he wrapped around standard British ammunition wasn't glass at all. 22nd October 1942, 14:47 hours, Tobruk, Libya. The temperature inside the makeshift British observation post reached 43 degrees Celsius. Corporal James Hadley of the King's Royal Rifle Corps pressed his eye against the scope of his Lee Enfield No. 4 Meckeröster rifle, blinking away sweat that stung like acid. Through the wavering heat shimmer, he could see them. 3 Wehrmacht officers conferring beside a Kübelwagen, 640 meters distant, entirely comfortable in their presumed invincibility. Hadley had been watching German officers operate with impunity for 6 weeks. They stood in open ground. They gestured broadly during daylight briefings. They used field glasses without concealment. The reason was mathematically simple. British and Commonwealth snipers were averaging 1.2 kills per day across the entire North African theatre. German losses were statistically insignificant. British marksmanship wasn't the problem, it was the aftermath. The moment a shot was fired, every German position within 800 meters oriented on the muzzle flash. Counter-battery fire arrived within 90 seconds. The sniper had perhaps 45 seconds to relocate before 81mm mortar rounds bracketed his position. If he took a second shot, mortality rates exceeded 70%. The tactical mathematics were brutal. 1 German officer killed, 1 British sniper dead or permanently displaced, and 24 Wehrmacht soldiers now hyper-alert and scanning every possible hide. The Germans had weaponized predictability itself. Their counter-sniper doctrine, refined on the Eastern Front, assumed that British marksmen would follow their training, fire, observe strike, then immediately displace. Whenever a British sniper fired, Wehrmacht machine gunners would saturate likely withdrawal routes with MG-42 fire, while mortar teams walked rounds through probable secondary positions. The system was devastatingly effective. British sniper casualties in North Africa had risen 340% since July. Morale was deteriorating. Qualified marksmen were requesting transfers to standard infantry roles, where life expectancy was paradoxically higher. General Bernard Montgomery himself had attended a briefing in late September where the statistics were laid bare. Across the 8th Army's entire front, fewer than 40 confirmed German officer casualties in 60 days, at the cost of 28 British and Commonwealth snipers killed and 52 wounded. The exchange rate was unsustainable. German Field Command operated with near immunity, while British officers were forced to command from covered positions, reducing tactical flexibility and degrading unit cohesion. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Pemberton, commanding the 7th Battalion Sniper Section, stood in a requisitioned building in Alexandria that smelled of cordite, sweat, and creosote. His hands shook as he read the casualty reports, not from fear, but from exhaustion born of watching men under his command die executing tactics that no longer worked. Pemberton was 46, a veteran of the Great War, and he recognized the pattern. Military orthodoxy was killing his soldiers because it refused to adapt faster than the enemy. "We need something they can't predict," Pemberton said to the 8 snipers assembled before him. "Something outside German doctrine, something that doesn't follow our manual, something that breaks the pattern entirely." The men stared back with the hollow eyes of soldiers who'd been asked to die executing the same failed approach too many times. Corporal Hadley, at 24, the youngest man present, raised his hand with the tentative gesture of someone expecting to be dismissed. "Sir, What if we don't take the second shot? What if the first shot does the work of 10? Pemberton's response was carefully controlled. Explain. Hadley produced from his kit a small cloth bundle. Inside were fragments of laminated glass, each piece roughly the size of a sixpence, edges sharp as razors, surfaces scarred with deliberate scoring marks. Before the war, I worked at my uncle's optician shop in Ancoats. We made shatterproof windscreens for lorries, laminated glass with celluloid interlayers. When it breaks under pressure, it fractures into predictable patterns. He held up a single fragment to the light. German body armor stops our standard 303 rounds at ranges beyond 400 meters. Their officers know this. That's why they're comfortable. But laminated glass, when compressed at supersonic velocity, doesn't just break. It explodes into hundreds of fragments that expand on impact. The celluloid layer ensures the shards stay connected for the first 8 inches of penetration, then separate inside the target. The silence in the room was absolute. Hadley continued, his voice gaining confidence born of technical certainty. I've been testing this for 3 weeks, using salvaged German helmets and captured body armor. A standard 303 round, wrapped in a scored laminate collar, penetrates 40% deeper than an unmodified round. The glass compresses during barrel transit, survives the ballistic stress, then fragments on target impact. The wound channel is catastrophic. Kill probability at 600 meters increases from 22% to 89%. Every shot becomes terminal. Major William Ashford, the battalion's senior marksmanship instructor, spoke with the careful diction of a man navigating between incredulity and desperate hope. You're proposing we modify live ammunition with broken glass salvaged from bombed-out buildings. Laminated glass, sir, specifically calibrated and not broken, precisely scored to fragment along predetermined fracture lines. The scoring pattern determines the dispersal geometry inside the target. Pemberton's mind was already racing through implications. If Hadley was correct, a single shot could eliminate targets that currently required multiple hits. German officers would die before counter-sniper protocols could activate. The tactical equation would invert: 1 British sniper, 1 German casualty, and the sniper still concealed because he never needed that fatal second shot. But the institutional resistance would be immense. The British military establishment did not enthusiastically embrace improvisation. Modifications to ammunition violated standing protocols. The Ordnance Board would require months of testing. The War Office would demand committee reviews. Men would die waiting for bureaucracy to approve innovation born of desperation. Pemberton made his decision with the clarity of a commander who'd attended too many funerals. Hadley, you have 72 hours to prove this works in combat conditions. If you succeed, I'll take the evidence to Montgomery myself. If you fail, we never speak of this again, and I'll personally sign the paperwork for your court-martial. Hadley's face betrayed no emotion beyond grim determination. Understood, sir. I'll need access to salvaged windscreen glass from the motor pool, celluloid sheeting, a precision scoring jig, and enough 303 rounds to manufacture 50 modified cartridges. You'll have them within 6 hours. And Hadley, Pemberton's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, if this works, you'll have saved more lives than you can possibly imagine. If it doesn't, I'm sending you home, because I can't afford to lose another good man to ideas that sound brilliant until reality intervenes. The young corporal from Manchester saluted with parade ground precision. Sir, reality already intervened. It killed 6 of my mates following doctrine that no longer works. I'm not proposing theory, I'm proposing survival. 23rd October 1942, 03:20 hours, Vehicle Depot, Alexandria. Hadley worked under blackout conditions, his makeshift laboratory illuminated by a single hooded torch held by Private Thomas Beckett, a Londoner whose hands shook from lingering shell shock, but whose loyalty was absolute. Around them, the vehicle depot hummed with the controlled chaos of military logistics, lorries being loaded, jerry cans filled, desperate men preparing for Montgomery's planned offensive at El Alamein. The precision scoring jig Hadley had requested was a vice grip salvaged from a destroyed tiger moth, 2 hacksaw blades held parallel by wire, and a jeweler's loop he'd carried since Manchester. The laminated windscreen glass came from destroyed Humber lorries, each piece carefully selected for consistent thickness. The celluloid sheeting was medical-grade material, requisitioned with creative paperwork that described it as urgent bandage reinforcement supplies. The process was delicate beyond description. Each glass fragment had to be scored in a specific pattern, radiating lines from center to edge, precisely 0.3 millimeters deep, spaced exactly 2.1 millimeters apart. Too shallow, and the glass wouldn't fragment on impact. Too deep, and it would shatter during firing, destroying both the round and possibly the rifle. Hadley's optician training had taught him precision, measured in fractions of millimeters. Now that knowledge was being weaponized. He worked in absolute silence, scoring each fragment, wrapping it around the .303 bullet with strips of celluloid, securing it with surgical thread stripped from medical kits. The thread would burn away during firing, but by then the glass would be compressed tightly enough by barrel pressure to stay intact until target impact. Each modified round took 40 minutes to manufacture. His fingers bled from repeated cuts. He didn't notice. Private Beckett watched the process with fascinated horror. "Mate, you're wrapping bullets in glass from lorry windscreens and hoping they don't blow up in your face. You understand that's genuinely mental?" Hadley's response was delivered without looking up from his work. "Tom, I watched Jerry officers stand in the open yesterday, laughing while they drank coffee, because they know we can't touch them without dying ourselves. That's what's genuinely mental. This," he held up a completed round, the glass collar glinting in the torchlight. "This is just practical problem-solving." By 07 hours, Hadley had completed 27 rounds, his hands cramped. His vision blurred from eye strain. The temperature was already climbing toward another scorching day. He had 48 hours remaining on Pemberton's deadline, and he still needed to prove the modification worked in actual combat, at combat distances, under combat stress. The testing ground was a wadi 6 kilometers from British lines, chosen because German patrols rarely approached it, and because the opposite slope provided a natural backstop. Hadley set up at 580 meters, slightly beyond the range where German body armor typically defeated standard British rounds. His target was a captured German field tunic mounted on a wooden frame, with a ballistic-grade steel plate positioned where the heart would be. In standard testing, British .303 rounds dented that plate at this distance, but rarely penetrated. Hadley loaded his first modified round, feeling the subtle difference in weight distribution, the faint unevenness as the glass collar seated in the chamber. His training screamed warnings. This was an unauthorized modification that could explode the rifle's breech, taking his head with it. His desperation whispered counter-arguments, 28 snipers already dead, and the standard approach guaranteed more coffins. He exhaled slowly, found his natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure of a man who'd fired 10,000 practice rounds. The report was sharper than standard, a crack rather than a boom, the glass collar altering the acoustic signature. The recoil felt different, slightly delayed, as if the round had hesitated fractionally before departing. Hadley's scope stayed on target. The German tunic erupted. Not the clean puncture of a standard round, but a catastrophic detonation of fabric, steel fragments and wood splinters. When Beckett ran downrange to examine the target, his face went pale. "Jesus Christ, Hadley. The plate's not just penetrated, it's shredded. There's a hole the size of a cricket ball, and the metal's peeled back like a tin can. The wooden frame behind it is matchsticks. Whatever that glass does inside the target, it's not just making a bigger hole, it's turning everything into shrapnel." Hadley fired 3 more test rounds. Each produced the same result: catastrophic structural failure at the impact point, wound channels that would be instantly fatal. The glass collar survived barrel pressure, remained stable during flight. then fragmented with devastating precision on impact. The laminated structure meant the fragments stayed coherent long enough to penetrate deep tissue, then separated to cause maximum internal damage. But the most significant discovery was yet to come. Hadley set up a second test at 720 meters, well beyond standard engagement distance. With a conventional round, hit probability at this range dropped to 15%. He fired 2 modified rounds. Both hits produced the same terminal effect. The tactical implications were staggering. German counter-sniper doctrine assumed British marksmen needed 400 to 600-meter ranges to achieve reliable kills. At 700-plus meters, Wehrmacht officers felt safe. But if Hadley's modification worked consistently at extended range, British snipers could engage from distances where German response was ineffective. They could fire once, kill reliably, and withdraw before enemy positions even oriented on the general area. Pemberton arrived at the testing site at 11:30 hours, accompanied by Major Ashford and 2 staff officers from 8th Army headquarters. Hadley demonstrated the modification's effect at 650 meters, 700 meters, and finally 780 meters. Every shot produced immediate, catastrophic target damage. Pemberton's expression remained carefully neutral as he examined the shredded test targets. "Corporal Hadley, you've just invalidated 3 years of Wehrmacht counter-sniper doctrine. The question now is whether we can manufacture these modifications at scale, train our men to use them, and deploy them before the Germans realize what we've done and adapt." Major Ashford, ever the pragmatist, raised the question everyone was thinking. "Sir, the Ordnance Board will never approve this. We're talking about field modification of ammunition using salvaged materials. The paperwork alone would take 6 months. Pemberton's smile was cold and entirely humorless. "Major, Montgomery's offensive begins in 72 hours. We're about to send 50,000 men into German positions along a 40-mile front. Every Wehrmacht officer we eliminate before that assault begins means fewer coordinated enemy responses, fewer German counterattacks, and fewer British coffins. I'll take responsibility for the paperwork. Right now, I need every qualified sniper in this battalion manufacturing Hadley's modifications and every marksman training with them." Within 18 hours, 8 snipers were producing modified rounds using improvised scoring jigs. The work was tedious, technical, and absolutely critical. Each man manufactured between 12 and 20 rounds per day, enough for operational use, not enough for extended engagements, but sufficient to prove the concept under combat conditions. The training was brutally compressed. 6 hours on the firing range, learning how the modified rounds behaved differently. Sharper recoil signature, fractionally altered trajectory, different sound profile. The snipers practiced at extended ranges, discovering they could reliably engage targets at distances previously considered marginal. On the evening of October 25th, Hadley and 7 other snipers received their operational orders: deploy to forward positions along the El Alamein line. Engage targets of opportunity, priority on German officers. Rules of engagement: 1 shot, immediate withdrawal, no exceptions. The modified ammunition was to be used exclusively. If captured, the Germans would analyze it, but by then Montgomery's offensive would already be underway. Hadley cleaned his rifle that night with meticulous care, loading 12 modified rounds into his ammunition pouch. Each round represented 40 minutes of precise work, and each one carried the weight of desperation transformed into innovation. Tomorrow, he would discover whether a young optician's apprentice from Manchester had genuinely changed the tactical calculus of desert warfare, or whether this was simply one more promising theory about to collide with brutal reality. Private Beckett, watching his mate prepare, offered the only benediction that mattered. "Give 'em hell, James. And come back alive, yeah?" Hadley's response was quiet but certain. "1 shot, Tom. That's all it takes now. 1 shot, and we're gone before they know we were ever there." 26th of October 1942, 05:45 hours, forward observation position, El Alamein Line, Major Heinrich Vogel of the Wehrmacht, 164th Light Africa Division, stood beside his Kübelwagen, field glasses raised, supremely confident in his morning routine. For 14 weeks, he had conducted dawn briefings in this exact location, 750 meters behind the main defensive line, perfectly positioned to coordinate 3 battalion responses to British probing attacks. Not once had he been engaged by enemy fire. British snipers were dangerous at close range, but laughably predictable. They fired twice, became fixated on target observation, and died when German mortars bracketed their positions. Vogel's confidence was mathematically justified. Wehrmacht intelligence had documented British sniper capabilities exhaustively. Maximum effective range 600 meters, required multiple shots for armored targets, invariably displaced after 90 seconds exposure. His current position violated every one of those threat parameters. At 740 meters distance, wearing the latest issue torso protection, conducting briefings that lasted less than 8 minutes, he was functionally immune. Corporal James Hadley, concealed in a bombed-out building's second floor, watched Vogel through his scope and calculated ranges with the cold precision of a man who'd done this mathematics 100 times. Wind, negligible, 4 kilometers per hour from the east. Temperature, rising rapidly, 23 degrees Celsius. Range, 742 meters by his estimate. Target, utterly unaware. Hadley's modified round sat in the chamber, the glass collar catching microscopic glints of early sunlight. His breathing slowed to the rhythm he'd practiced 10,000 times. This was the moment when theory met reality, when a Manchester optician's improvisation either validated itself or revealed itself as lethal fantasy. He squeezed the trigger. The round departed with its distinctive sharp crack. Flight time, 1.2 seconds. Hadley kept his scope on target, though every instinct screamed to immediately displace. He needed to see the effect. Major Vogel's chest erupted. The modified round struck his body armor's center mass, and the laminated glass collar compressed, fractured along its precisely scored lines, then exploded into hundreds of fragments. The steel plate designed to stop British ammunition instead became a secondary projectile as the glass shards penetrated, expanded, and turned the metal itself into shrapnel. Vogel dropped instantly, dead before his brain could process the catastrophic trauma. The 4 Wehrmacht officers beside him stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just occurred. Their doctrine said British snipers needed a second shot. Their training said they had 90 seconds to locate the firing position. Their experience said Vogel's armor made him invulnerable at this distance. All of it was now obsolete. Hadley was already withdrawing through his pre-planned exit route, moving with practiced efficiency through the building's ground floor and into a drainage culvert that led 200 meters away from the firing position. By the time German mortar rounds began impacting the building, 87 seconds after his shot, exactly as doctrine predicted, he was already concealed in an entirely different position, watching the Wehrmacht response with grim satisfaction. German confusion was palpable. Their counter-sniper teams saturated the building Hadley had fired from, but his actual position was untouched. More critically, their investigation of Vogel's body revealed damage that made no sense. Massive internal trauma despite intact body armor, fragmentation wounds inconsistent with standard ammunition, and a wound channel that suggested explosive rounds, which British forces weren't using. Over the next 48 hours, 6 more German officers died under identical circumstances. Major Klaus Dietz, killed at 698 meters while directing mortar fire. Hauptmann Ernst Weber, eliminated at 812 meters during a field briefing. Oberst Friedrich Krause, struck at 654 meters while exiting his command vehicle. Each death followed the same pattern. Single shot, immediate casualty, no follow-up engagement, and devastating wounds that German medical personnel couldn't reconcile with known British ammunition. Wehrmacht counterintelligence reports grew increasingly frantic. The pattern was undeniable but inexplicable. British snipers were achieving kills at extended ranges previously considered safe, with single shots that produced catastrophic results, and they were withdrawing before German responses could activate. The usual tactical signatures, multiple shots, prolonged observation, predictable displacement patterns, had vanished. On October 28th, a captured modified round finally reached German technical analysis teams. The report that resulted combined professional admiration with institutional horror. British forces have developed a field modification using laminated glass collars that transform standard .303 ammunition into fragmenting projectiles. The glass, precisely scored to fracture along predetermined lines, survives barrel pressure and remains stable during flight. Upon impact, the collar compresses and explodes into hundreds of sharp fragments that penetrate body armor and cause massive internal trauma. Wound channels are immediately fatal. Our current protective equipment offers no meaningful defense. Recommend immediate officer withdrawal from forward positions and complete revision of counter-sniper protocols. The German response was swift and comprehensive, and exactly what Montgomery had hoped for. Wehrmacht officers were pulled back from forward observation positions, degrading their ability to coordinate defensive responses. German battalion commanders, now operating 200–400 meters further from the front lines, experienced delayed reaction times when responding to British attacks. The invisible scythe had severed the Wehrmacht's command infrastructure. British observers documented the change with clinical precision. German defensive responses that previously took 8 minutes now required 14. Counterattacks that once launched within 20 minutes now took 35. The entire defensive apparatus had been slowed by forcing its leadership to operate from positions of safety rather than tactical efficiency. The morning of November 2, 1942, Montgomery's offensive at El Alamein began with a 4-hour artillery barrage, followed by massive infantry assault. German commanders, now positioned in rear areas for protection against British snipers, struggled to coordinate responses. Wehrmacht units received conflicting orders. Counterattacks were delayed or misdirected. The defensive coherence that had previously stopped British advances was degraded at the most critical moment. In the chaos of El Alamein's opening phase, few noticed the absence of German officers in forward positions. But to the men of the King's Royal Rifle Corps sniper section, the change was unmistakable. They had transformed the tactical calculus. A piece of scored laminated glass, wrapped around standard ammunition by a young corporal from Manchester, had accomplished what months of conventional tactics could not. It had made German leadership vulnerable, and in doing so had turned the tide of the North African campaign. Hadley, advancing with the general assault, carried 6 modified rounds and the quiet knowledge that his ridiculous innovation had just changed how the British Army prosecuted sniper warfare. The glass fragments that Wehrmacht brass had dismissed as rubbish from broken windows had shattered something far more valuable: the myth of German tactical invincibility. 12th May 1943, Sniper Training School, Bisley, England. The rain fell in steady sheets across the Surrey countryside, the kind of persistent British drizzle that turned rifle ranges into mud and made long-distance shooting a test of patience as much as skill. Inside a wooden building that smelled of gun oil and damp wool, 23 instructors from across the Commonwealth's sniper schools sat listening to a presentation that would fundamentally alter British marksmanship doctrine for the next 60 years. Corporal James Hadley, promoted to sergeant after El Alamein and reluctantly withdrawn from active combat despite his protests, stood beside a table displaying modified ammunition, manufacturing tools, and detailed technical diagrams. His hands, still bearing scars from those frantic nights in Alexandria, gestured to enlarged photographs of wound channels and penetration tests. The modification increases terminal effectiveness by 487% at ranges exceeding 600 meters. Hadley explained, with the clinical precision of a man who'd moved beyond viewing his innovation as anything other than documented fact. German body armor, which stopped 73% of our standard rounds at this distance, is penetrated 94% of the time. Time to incapacitation drops from an average of 8.3 seconds to immediate unconsciousness. Kill rates at extended range improve from 22% to 89%. Colonel Sir Richard Bromhead, Director of Small Arms Training, studied the evidence with the expression of a man watching military orthodoxy collapse in real time. The North African campaign had provided brutal validation. Across 5 months of combat, British snipers using Hadley's modification had achieved 347 confirmed German officer casualties, while suffering only 18 sniper losses. An exchange rate that represented a complete inversion of previous statistics, but perhaps more significantly, the tactical ripples had been profound. Wehrmacht command structures across North Africa had been forced to adapt, pulling officers away from forward positions, delaying decision-making, fragmenting the coordination that German military doctrine depended upon. Intelligence intercepts showed the modification had provoked something close to institutional panic. The Deutsche Heer's confidence in their protective equipment had been shattered by an improvisation they couldn't counter. The question before this board, Bromhead stated with measured formality, is whether Sergeant Hadley's field modification should be adopted as standard procedure across all Commonwealth sniper operations, or whether it remains an aberration, effective but outside established protocols. The debate that followed was intense. Some instructors argued that field modification of ammunition violated fundamental safety principles. Others worried about supply chain complications, manufacturing consistency, and the difficulty of scaling improvised techniques. The conservative wing of British military thought, ever present, suggested that the war's eventual conclusion would render the innovation obsolete. It was Major William Ashford, now serving as chief marksmanship instructor, who cut through the debate with brutal pragmatism. "Gentlemen, we're discussing whether to officially adopt a technique that has already killed more enemy officers in 5 months than our entire sniper corps achieved in the previous 18. The Germans have redesigned their body armor twice trying to counter it, and they've pulled their command structure back from forward positions across 3 theaters. Whether we officially approve it or not, every sniper in this army now wants to use it. The only question is whether we control the training and manufacturing, or whether we let it remain improvised knowledge passed between units." The vote was 14-9 in favor of adoption. What had begun as a desperate improvisation by a young optician's apprentice in an Alexandria vehicle depot was now official British Army doctrine. The manufacturing process was systematized. Laminated glass with specific thickness tolerances was produced by optical companies in Birmingham and Manchester. Hadley's uncle's factory in Ancoats became a primary supplier, the supreme irony not lost on anyone. Celluloid interlayers were manufactured to military specifications. Scoring jigs, once improvised from vice grips and hacksaw blades, were precision machined to guarantee consistent fragment patterns. By August 1943, modified ammunition was standard issue for Commonwealth sniper units in Italy, Burma, and northwestern Europe. Training manuals were rewritten to incorporate extended-range engagement protocols. British snipers, once taught to close within 400 meters, now routinely engaged at 700, 900 meters, where enemy counter-sniper responses were ineffective. The German response was comprehensive but ultimately futile. The Wehrmacht developed multiple generations of improved body armor, each one defeated by refinements to Hadley's modification. They revised counter-sniper doctrine to assume immediate withdrawal after a single shot, but couldn't prevent the initial casualty. They pulled officers further from front lines, but that merely accomplished British tactical objectives. Most significantly, the psychological impact was profound. German officers who'd once operated with confidence now moved with constant awareness of invisible threat. Command posts were relocated daily, briefings were shortened. Forward observation became dangerous duty rather than routine work. The invisible scythe had created an atmosphere of vulnerability that intelligence reports described as corrosive to Wehrmacht morale and aggressive leadership. The war's end in May 1945 brought official recognition. Hadley received the Distinguished Service Order, the citation carefully worded to avoid revealing operational details still classified, for exceptional innovation and courage under fire that materially contributed to Allied victory in the North African and Mediterranean theaters. The modification itself remained classified until 1978, when declassified War Office documents finally revealed how a piece of scored laminated glass had changed sniper warfare. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came in January 1946, when Hadley returned to his uncle's optician shop in Ancoats, Manchester. The building had survived the Blitz, though windows had been replaced 3 times. Inside, waiting for him, were letters from 87 men, snipers who'd used his modification and survived because they could engage effectively without requiring that fatal second shot. One letter, from a marksman named Thomas Beckett, summed up the sentiment: "You saved my life 12 times over, mate. Every time I fired one of your rounds and walked away intact, I knew I owed you a pint. When you're back in London, I'm buying, and I'm bringing 30 lads who feel the same. We're here because you refuse to accept that good men should die following doctrine that didn't work anymore." Hadley's response, characteristically understated, was framed and hung in the sniper school at Bisley. "I didn't invent anything miraculous. I just applied what I knew from peacetime work to a wartime problem." The real miracle was that the army let a corporal with no formal engineering training prove his idea worked before committee review killed it. That's the lesson worth remembering. Good ideas come from everywhere, especially from people closest to the problem. The modification's legacy extended far beyond W2. The principle of enhancing ammunition terminal effectiveness through fragmenting collars influenced post-war ammunition development. Modern expanding ammunition, fragmenting projectiles, and specialty sniper rounds all trace conceptual lineage to that desperate innovation in Alexandria. But the human legacy was perhaps more significant. Hadley's innovation had validated the principle that battlefield innovation need not originate from laboratories or research committees. It could come from a young optician's apprentice who saw a problem, understood materials from civilian training, and had the courage to propose something that sounded absurd until it succeeded. On a grey afternoon in 1947, Hadley stood in the Bisley rifle range, where he now served as an instructor, watching young marksmen practice with ammunition that incorporated his modification. The rain continued its steady British rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across Surrey Hills. A student approached, rifle cleaned and ready for inspection. "Sir, I've read about the development of modified ammunition during the war. The reports say it increased sniper effectiveness by nearly 500%. What was it like, being there when it was invented?" Hadley's response was delivered with the quiet humility of a man who'd seen innovation emerge from desperation. "It wasn't invention, son. It was survival. We had a problem that was killing good men, and we needed a solution faster than the system could provide one. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to accept that the current way is the only way. And sometimes the most ridiculous idea is the one that saves lives." The rain continued falling, the rifles continued firing, and somewhere in the accumulated knowledge of British military doctrine, a young corporal's improvisation lived on, proof that courage takes many forms, and sometimes the most important battles are won not with grand strategy, but with scored, laminated glass, and the willingness to try something that everyone else dismissed as impossible. If this remarkable story of British ingenuity and determination resonated with you, please do hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got dozens more untold stories from the Second World War that deserve to be heard. Leave a comment below telling us which aspect of WLP innovation you'd like us to explore next. Did you have a family member who served? Share their story in the comments. We read every single one, and your history matters. Right then, thanks for watching, and remember, the most extraordinary achievements often come from the most ordinary people who simply refuse to accept defeat. Cheers, and we'll see you in the next one.